princesses, betrayals, friends, and a lot of fantasy in a single story, so let's look. Teppei wraps up his fencing practice and heads home for a meal with his parents. While watching the news, they learn about a 45-year-old man who was attacked the previous day in Shibuya, adding to the list of recent incidents. But Teppei isn't bothered. He figures the victims are always wealthy folks, so he doesn't have to worry. His parents, on the other hand, are concerned and ask what he would do in such a situation. Teppei, unfazed, says he'd come up with something. Later that day, he heads off to school, saying goodbye to his parents, not knowing it'll be the last time he sees them. After 2 months of dealing with their absence and presumably living alone, he decides to visit Ishinha, who has finally decided to adopt him. As he's thinking about this, he sees a carriage with a clearly rich girl being chased by a group of thugs and recalls his father's last words asking what he'd do in such a situation. Unable to ignore it, he decides to intervene. The thugs are relentless with the girl, Charlotte Hazelrink, who's terrified for her life, getting hit in the carriage and shot from behind. Her butler, Alfred, because what else would a butler be named, promises to protect her, but things are looking pretty dire. Enter Teppei, who jumps in to fight the thugs but finds his training lacking as he struggles to hold them off. When the attackers start to gain the upper hand, Alfred drops his weakling act and leaps onto the thugs' car to fight them off, showing he's got some serious combat skills. However, with the carriage now driverless and getting wrecked by the thugs, Charlotte's in grave danger. As Alfred continues fighting, Teppei decides to help her, but they both end up falling from a great height into the forest, and Alfred and the thugs assume they're dead. But they're wrong. The trees break their fall, and they land safely with just a few scratches. When they wake up, they introduce themselves, and upon hearing Charlotte's last name, Teppei jokes about her having a princess's name, which she confirms. Later, they head back to the road and find Teppei's motorcycle in better shape than expected. They also find Alfred, who's been waiting for the princess. Charlotte quickly leaves, giving Teppei a kiss on the cheek before heading off. Blushing, Teppei remembers he needs to get to Arima Ishin's house and rushes off on his motorcycle. Then we learn that Ishin is his maternal grandfather, and he's not too thrilled about Teppei's tardiness. Eventually, they meet in person and discuss what happened 2 months ago. Teppei suspects his parents' death wasn't an accident, and his grandfather confirms it. Teppei vows to get revenge, but his grandfather warns him that it's a vicious cycle of vengeance that his parents wouldn't have approved of. Without giving Teppei a chance to pursue the topic or change his dirty clothes, Ishin takes him to a big party and introduces him as the successor of the Arima Corporation. Teppei is shocked since he wasn't aware of his grandfather's plans. Ishin apologizes for his grandson's attire, saying it's because Teppei was saving the Hazelrink princess, which astonishes all the guests. Alone, Teppei complains to his grandfather, saying he only came for help with revenge, not to be the successor. Ishin explains that those who killed his parents were against Kine, Ishin's daughter and Teppei's mother, becoming the successor to the corporation. So, the plan is for Teppei to make friends with everyone at the party since many of them might stab him in the back, helping him figure out who conspired against him. Back at the party, everyone surrounds Teppei, desperately trying to get his attention. Then Vincent Van Hoesen manages to politely get them away so he can talk to Teppei alone. Later, tired of the party and people, Teppei steps away to be alone and sees a girl practicing high-level fencing. He approaches to compliment her, but she starts attacking him, and they engage in a fencing duel, with Teppei wielding his wooden sword. After a while, Vincent and Ishin show up, and Teppei learns that the beautiful girl he was fighting is Sylvia, Vincent's daughter, and his future fiancée. After a day full of excitement, Teppei is exhausted and falls asleep on the chest of his maid, Yu. Ishin asks Yu if it was hard for her to adjust when he adopted her from the orphanage, but Yu assures him it wasn't and that she's grateful. Ishin, however, wonders if the controlled environment isn't overwhelming, and then talks about Sylvia and how he did the same thing with his daughter Kane. He decides not to push Teppei too much and says he'll let Teppei make decisions while keeping an eye from a distance. The limousine arrives at Teppei's new home. Upon waking up and seeing the massive mansion, Teppei can't believe his eyes. Without much explanation, Ishin leaves, and Teppei learns he'll be living there with Yu, his personal maid, and hundreds of other servants. Teppei asks not to be called master as he's uncomfortable with it, but he's completely dazzled by every corner of the mansion, including his room. As he lies in bed, he can't stop thinking about everything that happened that day, especially Charlotte and Sylvia. He decides to call Yu to have some tea and chat for a while. Tepe asks if arranged marriages are normal, considering the lack of knowledge about each other's feelings and the fact that they don't even know each other. Yu explains that Ishin arranged the marriage with both of them in mind and tells him that Sylvia is an aristocrat from the Flemish kingdom and a great fencer. However, Tepe refers to her personality and mentions feeling a deep sadness while fighting her. When Tepe asks if he can refuse the marriage, Yu says it depends on him and how he handles the situation within a reinforced environment. The next day, Yu accompanies Tepe to Shuhu Academy, where he'll be attending from now on. When they arrive at the impressive and expensive academy, all the students turn to look at him, as the Arima family is well known and their limousine carries their name. Overwhelmed by the attention, Tepe decides to sneak away unnoticed but ends up bumping into a girl in the halls. After apologizing, he learns she's Hujuan Saika, the club president. Later, when she finds out Tepe is from the Arima family, she decides to show him that his surname doesn't mean he can do whatever he wants. Tepe and Yu then head to the director's office, where he and other teachers greet Tepe warmly, as the Arima family has donated a large sum of money to the institute. Throughout the day, everyone looks at Tepe with admiration just because he's from the Arima family, which makes him very uncomfortable. He meets his classmate Nizu and his other classmates who want to win his favor. At that moment, Charlotte appears and approaches Tepe to thank him for saving her. When she tries to hug him, she makes an awkward move, ending up with Tepe on top of her in a very embarrassing position in front of the entire class. Just then, Sylvia arrives, sees them in that position, gets angry, and leaves, claiming they're indecent. Later, Tepe tells Charlotte that Sylvia is his fiancée, and though Charlotte is saddened, she decides to accompany Tepe to apologize. They head to the fencing hall, where Tepe immediately notices that Sylvia feels alone when fighting, as there are no opponents to fully display her skills. Charlotte yells at Sylvia that Tepe wants to face her so she won't be lonely, which Sylvia takes poorly and decides to challenge Tepe, continuing the fight from the previous day. Rumors spread around the academy that Tepe and Sylvia will face off in a duel, drawing many students to the practice hall to watch. Hearing this, Yu calls to have Tepe's sword brought to him. In the hall, Sylvia defeats Tepe in 2 seconds but then says it's pointless to fight in an activity she excels at. So, they decide to battle as they did the previous day, each with their own weapon and no fencing rules. Tepe receives his sword just in time, and the second duel begins, with both fighters happy to face someone of their level. Watching Sylvia's moves, Tepe recalls that the last counterattack she showed the previous night was a deadly one-hit technique, so the duel will be decided quickly. Just as predicted, in one incredibly swift move, both end up facing each other with their weapons touching their opponent's body. Sylvia declares it a tie, but Tepe says she was faster. If it had been a real sword, she would have cut him already. Saika is annoyed that Tepe wasn't humiliated and leaves in a huff. Tepe tells Sylvia that continuing to fight is a good way to get to know each other, considering the marriage and all, and mentions he'll decide whether to accept the marriage later but won't reject it for now to keep things interesting. Later, Tepe asks Yu about the social club since both Charlotte and Sylvia recommended he join. Yu explains that it's an association made up of the most prestigious people at the academy. When Tepe asks if he wants to join, she says she doesn't have enough prestige and that trying would only disgrace Tepe, which makes him uncomfortable. The next day, Tepe heads to the club with Charlotte and Sylvia, where Niza greets him excitedly. However, seconds later, Saika storms into the building, furious that Tepe is there, and starts insulting him, saying he's taking advantage of Charlotte and Sylvia. At the same time, she harshly accuses Sylvia of just bowing to the Arima power, creating a hostile situation that Sylvia won't let slide. Saika argues that she's only doing this to maintain the rules and traditions of the club and tells Tepe that not just anyone can join the club, candidates must undergo very strict tests before becoming official members. Saika tells Tepe he must earn his place at the academy before joining the club and mocks Tepe's father for working in a noodle shop. Although Tepe wasn't initially eager to fight for his spot, hearing this enrages him, and he decides to do whatever it takes to prove his worth at the academy. Saika announces that there will be a party at the club next week and that if Tepe behaves appropriately, he might become a member. Over the next few days, Tepe trains and learns the rules and manners of high society, sipping tea quietly, walking with books on his head, and so on. One night, he talks to Yu and tells her she reminds him of his mother because of the care tasks and such. Yu then mentions that Ishin has high expectations for Tepe and hopes he matures quickly to take his place. Saika watches Tepe train and doesn't understand why he's putting so much effort into it. She then hears in the halls that some students are talking about how Saika hates the Arima family and realizes she's coming off as the villain. Later, he notices Teppei is struggling with learning high society manners and recalls she had to learn a lot of that etiquette for her sword training, so she decides to use that foundation to help Teppei train. The day of the party arrives, and Teppei handles conversations, dancing, and the banquet flawlessly, impressing everyone around him. At the end of the party, Saika acknowledges that Teppei has significantly improved his manners in a short time, which she hates because she can't lose to an Arima. However, Saika makes it clear that joining the club isn't just about knowing how to behave at a party. Teppei must also organize a party himself. She gives him 2 weeks to organize a party for the club, and the outcome will determine if he'll be a club member or not. Even though Saika tries to distract herself by painting, eating, or reading, she's still pissed off because she can't get Teppei out of her head. Meanwhile, Teppei gets an incredible custom-made motorcycle from the Arima Automotive Research Lab. Teppei wanted a bike, but you wouldn't let him have one because of the risk of getting hurt. So, why not a motorcycle that can't fall over? To test it out, Teppei kicks the bike to the side, and sure enough, it doesn't fall. This actually makes him feel a bit uneasy. At the club, Teppei chats with his friends about the fancy party he has to organize since he's never been to a party as posh as the ones held at the club, and he's clueless about how to handle it. While they're talking, Saika's friends call him a pig and complain about him hanging around the club when he's not even a member yet. Then they mention that Saika is the only daughter of Houdini, the president of a huge corporation, and also the top young designer and model in the company. Saika then shows up, and they find out she's asked Nizu to attend the launch of her new fashion brand, St. Rose, the next day. She needs to bring a classmate along for the interview, not to brag about her modeling, but because they want to interview her. Later, Teppei asks you why Saika sees him, or the entire Arima family, as enemies, but since she can't give him a straight answer, she just tells him to talk to Ishin. That night, Teppei talks to his grandpa, who wants to emphasize his relationship with Sylvia. Teppei says they're just getting to know each other and becoming friends. So, he quickly shifts to the topic he's really interested in. When he asks about Saika, Grandpa reacts with concern and then hands Teppei a letter that he needs to give to Saika. The next day, Nizu shows up at school completely sick. Even though he really wants to go to the interview, his illness won't let him. So, Teppei decides to take on the role since there's no time to find someone else. When Saika sees him at the event, she's furious but agrees to let him handle the interview. After the event and her runway show, Saika meets with Teppei for the interview. Throughout the interview, both of them subtly bicker so the interviewers don't catch on. Listening to her talk, Teppei realizes that the club, besides organizing school events, is kind of like a student council, representing students to the teachers but with no real power. Teppei also gives a touching speech about what a great leader Saika is as the club president. Later, at dinner, still a bit tense, Teppei explains to Saika why she hates the Arima family so much. We learn that the Huda advertising agency, owned by the Hujuan family, used to be affiliated with the Arima group and was responsible for organizing several events. During Japan's rapid development period, Ishin neglected his family and just worked non-stop. His wife felt alone and ended up having an affair with Saika's grandpa, which led to G kicking his wife out and removing Hudu from the list of affiliated companies. Also, Saika's brand tried to sell at one of the Arima department stores but was rejected. Hearing this, Saika gets mad, claiming it's the old man's fault because he said that using a vulgar girl's business would tarnish the Arima store's reputation. It's an unfair grudge since Saika blames Teppei's grandpa for everything. Her ultimate goal is to expose Ishin's ignorance. Then, Teppei gives Saika the letter and explains that he asked Ishin to make him the director of the stores the night before. Once he got the position, he allowed the purchase of Saika's products. He also says that Ishin regrets what happened and wants to apologize to Saika's grandpa but can't because it would damage Arima's reputation. So, Teppei proposes they both let go of the past grudges and help each other out. Saika thanks him for everything he's done for her, but she still has to organize the party. A few days later, Teppei heads to the academy when he congratulates him for mending the historic rift between his family and Saika's. At the academy, Nizu almost corners Teppei to thank him for helping with the interview when he was sick and wants to return the favor. He asks what Teppei is doing over the break, and even though Teppei tries to dodge the question, Yu spills the beans that he has no plans. Despite Nizu's overwhelming intensity, Teppei is relieved to find out that Nizu's way of returning the favor is helping him organize the party to get into the social club. They start secretly plotting a plan that seems pretty shady, involving masks and immoral activities. At that moment, Charlotte asks Tepe to hang out during the break. She then talks to Sylvia, who's her childhood friend, to ask for permission to spend time with Tepe. Even though Sylvia says she doesn't need to ask for permission since they're not engaged yet, she's sad to hear Charlotte wants to go out with him. What's worse, she asks Sylvia to help keep this secret from the adults. Meanwhile, Saika's friends insult Tepe, and she defends him, leaving them dumbfounded. That night, Vincent notices something weird with Sylvia and Tepe because it's the first night she doesn't talk about him, though she insists they're just friends practicing fencing together. I know that excuse all too well. We find out that Sylvia doesn't want to commit to Tepe because if she did, she wouldn't be able to return to the Flemish Empire. Her father explains that the empire isn't in good shape and hopes that she and her sister find happiness in the peaceful country they're in since returning isn't safe. Feeling down about the situation, Sylvia calls Charlotte, who's getting ready for her date with Tepe. Charlotte first asks if Sylvia can help keep the secret the next day, and Sylvia decides to hang up. The day of the date arrives, and Charlotte decides to fly to Osaka to spend the day away from bodyguards and just enjoy the date. They go to an amusement park, a zoo, and then have a meal where Tepe talks about how delicious his mother's cooking used to be. Seeing the surprise on Charlotte's face, Tepe shares that his parents passed away, and that's why he ended up at Ishin's house. Charlotte tells him that as long as he's alive, his parents live on in his heart and memories. As they watch the sunset, Charlotte changes the subject and asks if Tepe really plans to marry Sylvia. Tepe says he doesn't know yet. Charlotte mentions that she and Sylvia used to be very close friends and that Sylvia was very different back then. Everything changed when she lost her mother in an accident. Since then, she's worn a locket with her mother's picture. After a deep conversation about the privileges and secrets that wealthy people hide, Tepe finally comes up with an idea for organizing the party. Before they part ways, Charlotte hugs Tepe from behind and asks him not to forget her and keep her in his heart, leaving Tepe pretty confused. Tepe decides to put his party plan into action and shares it with the main people in the club. Surprised by the plan, everyone gets on board and they all head to the train station. According to the plan, they'll spend the night at the hot springs to experience how ordinary people spend their vacations. The only reason for this is that it's a vacation and an extraordinary party. The club is shocked and a bit intimidated by the thought of doing common people activities. They don't know how to buy tickets or deal with crowds, but they love the experience of riding the train. Upon arriving at the hotel, Charlotte is fascinated by her traditional Japanese-style room, and Sylvia finds it charming. Meanwhile, Yu hopes to have a room to herself since, as a servant, she's not allowed to share a room with the social club members. However, Tepe explains that the whole point of this party is to break those rules and have a great time laughing and partying with the people they care about. While the girls enjoy their stay and plan activities, the guys reveal their real reason for being there, to be perverts. Besides breaking down social hierarchies and trying local food, their main goal is to accidentally see the girls at the hot springs and pretend it was a mistake. The girls, sensing something, warn that anyone who tries to spy will be in serious trouble. At the hot springs, the guys start fantasizing about what the women's hot springs might be like, imagining explicit scenes. Unable to handle it, one guy runs towards the women's area but gets hit so hard that his friends hold a farewell that resembles a funeral. They decide their next plan will be to surround the area, but as they approach, the fog or steam makes it hard to see. A guy who's only there for this moment decides to sacrifice himself so Tepe and Niza can continue. After saying goodbye, Tepe and Niza press on, but when Tepe looks back, he realizes Nizu has fallen into a trap and he's alone. Determined not to let his friend's sacrifice be in vain, Tepe continues, but accidentally steps into another trap that catapults him hundreds of meters into the women's hot springs. The guys get a harsh scolding from the girls who can't believe they're acting like children. Although they want to punish them, they decide it would ruin the vacation and forgive them instead. They move on to regular plans like playing table tennis, karaoke, and other teen activities. That night, Minnie appreciates sleeping in the same room with others, not remembering the last time it happened. Saika assures Tepe that she'll let him into the club. As they chat, Sylvia, Charlotte, Yu, and Saika realize they all have feelings for Tepe and at some point, he'll have to choose one of them. They make a promise that when that happens, none of them will get angry or jealous. They call it the Hot Springs Promise. Back at the academy, Charlotte and Tepe chat animatedly while Sylvia eavesdrops. Remembering the Hot Springs Promise makes her sad, as there's a possibility Tepe could end up with someone else. When Sylvia leaves, Alfred suddenly appears, annoyed because he lost track of Charlotte for a while and knows she's always with Tepe. He declares he's ready to fight Tepe to protect Charlotte, but the princess calms him down, saying she can't get involved with Tepe because she loves him. Alfred thinks it's a misunderstanding, but Charlotte insists she loves Tepe. This only makes Alfred more furious, leading to a chase where they both run to avoid blows. When they're safe and alone, Charlotte says she twisted her ankle running because she was wearing high heels. Tepe carries her so she doesn't have to walk. In the infirmary, they see a shower of rose petals falling from the sky, drawing a crowd. A boastful young man parachutes in, and Sylvia recognizes him as Hartmann Bezelheim, a businessman from Hazelrink, Charlotte's home country. He's connected with the nobility and the Arima group. Hartmann announces he's Charlotte's fiancé, which embarrasses her. After saying he'll be around for a few days, he leaves. Sylvia is furious that Charlotte didn't tell her about her fiancé. To smooth things over, Tepe proposes taking Charlotte to the place she wanted to go as a compensation for injuring her ankle. Charlotte becomes much more cheerful and hugs him. That night, Sylvia overhears her father talking on the phone about the possibility of Flemish being destroyed. The next day, Sylvia confronts Charlotte, asking if she knew about secret nuclear weapons being built at the border between Hazelrink and Flemish, and if her family knew anything about it. Charlotte says she didn't know and doubts her father did either. Sylvia speculates that a third country might be trying to disrupt the good relations between Hazelrink and Flemish. Saika, who overheard the conversation, reveals that all media outlets have received a warning that something will happen at Arima Hills that night. Unaware of this, Charlotte gets a message to meet Tepe at Arima Hills. That night, Ishin, Vincent, and Hartmann meet to discuss a collaborative project involving their three countries, a new resort complex at the border, though they know a third country has secretly collaborated. They suspect the resort is a cover for building nuclear weapons underground, which would damage relations between the two countries. This implies that Princess Charlotte's engagement to Hartmann, who is in charge, is part of the plan. Ishin says the first step is to make Flemish suspicious, making them believe Hazelrink is strengthening its military, though it's underestimating Flemish. Since Hartmann gave the opportunity, he must lead the investigation. They must ensure the safety of Arima's personnel from Japan, as there's a chance they might suspect Arima. Vincent warns that if this becomes known, it will disturb Hazelrink and Flemish citizens. The media has already leaked information, so they need to hurry and be cautious. As Charlotte waits in the Arima Hills suite, Tepe receives an unknown message: hypocritical heir of the rich, having disposed of your parents, now I will take away those who love you. An armed group enters Arima Hills and threatens all the employees before reaching the room where the three major businessmen are gathered. Josephine appears behind them, causing Hartmann to look bewildered as he seems to recognize her. Meanwhile, Ishin manages to communicate with Yu, who learns that he's been taken hostage but reassures her that he's fine. Yu starts mobilizing contacts to rescue him but finds out that all intercoms within Arima Hills have been shut off. At the same time, Charlotte is taken hostage by masked men, who tell her they're on a mission and won't harm her if she doesn't resist. They reveal that many groups are unhappy with Arima and that their movement is meant to erode external confidence in them. They admit that they specifically targeted Charlotte because they hate the rich, blaming poor money redistribution for others suffering and wanting to end it. The only goal is to get the news coverage, but Saika has managed to use her contacts to censor news about the hostages, which jeopardizes their plan. Yu temporarily hacks the security cameras and sees the three leaders. Tepe seems indifferent until he notices Charlotte is involved, deciding it's more important to rescue her than to worry about an old man. Tepe heads to Arima on his motorcycle with Sylvia joining him. After briefly battling other motorcyclists, they arrive at the building. Once there, they confront the masked men but find themselves outgunned. The police arrive to assist Arima, taking over that part of the situation. Meanwhile, Saika arrives by helicopter and uses her idol group to attract media attention. Hartmann faces Josephine and is shot, dying in the process. Seeing their plan fail, the criminal group Truth decides to leave but plants bombs at the building's corners. As the rest of the team tries to escape, Tepe searches for Charlotte to untie her, but a blackout hits the entire building. Yu, the genius hacker, identifies the bombs and alerts everyone that they are in the helicopter. They start figuring out how to save the hostages. Yu reports that there are 5 bombs, making the building's collapse inevitable. As Tepe and Charlotte try to escape, they receive a communication from Josephine mocking them for falling into the trap. When Tepe asks why they're doing this, Josephine explains that their goal is to dethrone and humiliate the rich. Yu says she can remove the virus to regain control of communications, but this would require reformatting the entire system, resulting in the loss of all Arima group data. Ishin insists that the data isn't crucial since he and everyone in the group, including the servants, have the information in their hearts or something like that. As they begin the reformatting, the police manage to find and disarm some of the bombs. Sylvia and Saika decide to disarm one of the remaining bombs themselves, while Tepe and Charlotte are left with the last one. However, the entire path is blocked by giant metal shutters that Tepe struggles to bypass. After several failed attempts, Charlotte, who had been a bystander, grabs a chainsaw she finds and, in mere seconds, they break through the shutter and continue on their way. Saika and Sylvia discuss their feelings for Tepe, while Ishin and Vincent debate how to inform Charlotte and the king about Hartmann's death. Yu manages to restore the building's connection with just 10 minutes left before the bombs explode. The police successfully disarm their bombs. Sylvia and Saika manage to disarm theirs with just 1 minute to spare. Charlotte and Tepe encounter the man who had taken Charlotte hostage, and he shoots at them, missing. Tepe tells Charlotte to hide behind him while he faces the man. The man shoots again, but Tepe blocks the attack with his wooden sword and knocks him out with a punch. They reach the bomb with 10 seconds left and, unsure of what to do, Tepe throws it down the building's trash chute, which is made of earthquake-resistant material. The explosion causes no damage, and the worst is over. As everyone celebrates their safety, Sylvia informs Charlotte about Hartmann's death and his attempt to save Ishin and Vincent. Charlotte admits she never loved Hartmann but cared for him, and her chauffeur arrives to take her back home in the limousine. After Charlotte leaves, Ishin, Vincent, and you gather with the rest of the group and ask where the princess is, as Alfred was supposed to pick her up in a few minutes. They panic when they realize that the limousine that took the princess doesn't belong to Charlotte's family. Inside the limousine, the driver stops to let Josephine in. As he removes his chauffeur's hat, it's revealed that he is actually Hartmann, who has been conspiring with Josephine all along. Before Charlotte can react, Josephine uses chloroform to put her to sleep. After reviewing the security footage, everyone realizes that Hartmann was behind everything and that capturing the princess has turned the situation into an international issue, complicating their ability to act. While the adults deliberate on what to do, the young ones are filled with rage, especially Tepe, who roams through the places he visited with Charlotte, feeling utterly useless for not being able to help her. He then realizes he's in love with her. Later, Charlotte wakes up on the Royal Transcontinental train, facing Hartmann, who explains that he orchestrated everything to ultimately kill Tepe, causing Ishin to fall into total despair. This, he believes, would make it easy to humiliate and take everything from him. Charlotte asks why he's doing this, but Hartmann chooses not to answer. When he leaves, Charlotte takes advantage of the guards' admiration for her and convinces them to remove her restraints, claiming they're causing her pain. The protagonists learn that Charlotte is heading towards Hazel Rink. Saika scolds Tepe for giving up on rescuing Charlotte and then kisses him, confessing her love. Sylvia then appears, hitting Tepe for being cowardly, and tells him she will go save Charlotte, sharing information about the princess's destination. The infatuated guards reveal to Charlotte that they're heading to Russia. Charlotte pretends to be a spoiled princess to be taken to the bathroom. While she's bathing, Josephine mistreats her, jealous that she's engaged to Hartmann, despite Charlotte's lack of interest, as Josephine is in love with the traitor. Sylvia confronts her father, who is reluctant to let her go to Hazel Rink due to the danger. However, she convinces him to let them all go, including her younger sister, to save Charlotte and return to Japan afterward. Later, it's revealed that the information about the final destination was leaked by Hartmann and Josephine themselves, hoping Tepe would come to rescue Charlotte. Tepe meets with his grandfather, who had been expecting him, and gives him 1,000,000 yen. He also gives a speech about not letting money corrupt one's soul, referencing someone who was tainted by money, presumably Hartmann, though this is not explicitly stated. In addition to the money, Tepe receives an extremely sharp sword from the Arima group and is wished luck on his mission to save Charlotte, with the reminder that many in the Arima group depend on him, no pressure. While waiting for his private plane, Tepe is accompanied by Saika, who is worried about her beloved's safety. After hugging him, she asks if he would rescue her if she were kidnapped. Tepe assures her he would, which excites her, and then he departs on his mission. Meanwhile, Yu, in hacker mode, contacts many who helped with the Arima Hills case to seek their assistance in this mission. Hartmann and Josephine are pleased that Tepe has taken the bait. Later, Tepe and Yu arrive in Flemish, where Sylvia and her family greet them with a party. As Yu chats with Sylvia's younger sister, Sylvia and Tepe have a conversation and decide to face off in a duel reminiscent of their first meeting. During the fight, Tepe wants to confess his love for Charlotte but becomes distracted and loses the duel. Sylvia then tells him to break off the engagement, not wanting to be with a man who has lost to her twice, and kisses him on the lips. After this first and last romantic encounter, Sylvia decides to end their relationship, though she knows Tepe's feelings for Charlotte. They agree it's time to save the princess. As the train passes through Flemish, Sylvia contacts the Wren, stating that they can't travel through their territory, but they're clearly ignored. They see a motorcycle speeding parallel to the train, and everyone, including Charlotte, believes it's Tepe. When they start attacking, the motorcyclist removes his helmet, revealing it to be Alfred. Charlotte is disappointed, but Alfred does everything to save her and faces off alone against dozens of armed men. One of these men fires a missile that destroys part of a train car, allowing Tepe to infiltrate, as planned, and stop the train after knocking out the conductor. In the unfolding chaos, Josephine takes Charlotte hostage again and brings her at gunpoint in front of Tepe, deciding to shoot them both as she also hates Charlotte. At that moment, Hartmann appears from behind and shoots Josephine repeatedly for not following the plan. He then reveals that his motivation for all this stems from an incident in his youth when Ishin, discovering him trying to steal, humiliated him in front of everyone. From that day, Hartmann vowed revenge and to humiliate Ishin and ultimately destroy him. This backstory seems a bit excessive. Hartmann had planned everything to take over the Arima group until Tepe's appearance as heir ruined his plans. As he reveals this, he releases the train cars where Alfred and Sylvia were. Tepe begins to fight Hartmann but, after being shot, falls off the side of the train and his body is seen drifting away. Even though the bullet didn't hit Tepe, the fall from the train leads everyone to believe he's dead. Hartmann then reveals his plan to manipulate public opinion to appear as the hero and eventually marry Charlotte. Charlotte argues that no one will believe Hartmann's story and delivers a speech about telling the truth and trusting people, platitudes from someone living in a bubble away from reality. She asks Hartmann to tend to Josephine's wounds, but he refuses. Charlotte decides to treat Josephine herself, saying it's something Tepe would do. The infatuated guards offer to help Charlotte, revealing that they studied medicine but didn't complete their studies due to a lack of money. To earn it, they took up work as guards for Hartmann. Meanwhile, Sylvia and Alfred manage to catch Tepe in midair before he's harmed by the fall. Alfred dismounts to speed up their journey, and with Yu's guidance, they find a shortcut to reach the train before it's too late. When Hartmann learns that Tepe is still alive, he takes Charlotte hostage again. Tepe and Hartmann face off. Tepe explains that Ishin's intention during the robbery was to encourage Hartmann to rise up and that he never meant to humiliate him. If I were in Hartmann's shoes, I'd probably want to shoot a wealthy kid who tells me that too. Tepe gives a speech about choosing one's path and other motivational stuff. Hartmann then uses a bomb to destroy the train, intending to die alongside Tepe and Charlotte. Before this, Hartmann confesses that he was the one who killed Tepe's parents. As the train is about to crash, Tepe and Charlotte jump onto a motorcycle with Sylvia and Alfred. The butler throws Hartmann into the sea to save himself, telling him to correct his path. Hartmann ends up in the hospital with Josephine. Back at the club, Tepe and Charlotte are welcomed with a grand celebration. And that's a wrap on this anime that stirred so many emotions. If you enjoyed this series, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and be part of this amazing community. Until next time.